20. A question of hope. He wandered wincing in sleep, expecting nightmares, but he had none. Through the vague rise and fall of his drifting, as even asleep his senses were alert to the land, he felt that he was being distantly watched. The gaze on him was anxious and beneficent. It reminded him of the old beggar who had made him read an essay on the fundamental question of ethics. When he woke up, he found that Manholm was bright with sunshine. The shadowed ceiling of the cave was dim, but light reflecting off the village floor seemed to dispel the oppressive weight of the stone. And the sun reached far enough into Manholm to tell Covenant that he had awakened early in the afternoon of a warm pre-summer day. He lay near the back of the cave in an atmosphere of stillness. Beside him sat Saltheart Foamfollower. Covenant closed his eyes momentarily. He felt he had survived a gauntlet, and he had an unfocused sense that his bargain was going to work. When he looked up again, he asked, "How long have I been asleep?" As if he had just been roused from the dead. "Hail and welcome, my friend," returned the giant. "You make my diamond draft appear weak. You have slept for only a night and a morning." Stretching luxuriously, Covenant said, "Practice. I do so much of it. I'm becoming an expert." "A rare skill," Foamfollower chuckled. "Not really. There are more of us lepers than you might think." Abruptly, he frowned as if he had caught himself in an unwitting violation of his promised forbearance. In order to avoid being taken seriously, he added in a lugubrious tone, "We're everywhere." But his attempt at humor only appeared to puzzle the giant. After a moment, Foamfollower said slowly, "There are others? Leper is not a good name. It is too short for such as you. I do not know the word, but my ears hear nothing in it but cruelty." Covenant sat up and pushed off his blankets. "It's not cruel exactly." The subject appeared to shame him. While he spoke, he could not meet Foamfollower's gaze. "It's either a meaningless accident or a just desert. If it were cruel, it would happen more often." "More often?" "Sure. If leprosy were an act of cruelty, by God or whatever, it wouldn't be so rare. Why be satisfied with a few thousand abject victims when you could have a few million?" "Accident," Foamfollower muttered. "Just. My friend, you bewilder me. You speak with such haste. Perhaps the despiser of your world has only a limited power to oppose its creator." "Maybe. Somehow, I don't think my world works that way." "Yet you said, did you not, that lepers are everywhere?" "That was a joke, or a metaphor." Covenant made another effort to turn his sarcasm into humor. "I can never tell the difference." Foamfollower studied him for a long moment, then asked carefully, "My friend, do you jest?" Covenant met the giant's gaze with a sardonic scowl. "Apparently not." "I do not understand this mood." "Don't worry about it." Covenant caught his chance to escape this conversation. "Let's get some food. I'm hungry." To his relief, Foamfollower began laughing gently. "Ah, Thomas Covenant," he chuckled. "Do you remember our river journey to Lord's Keep? Apparently there is something in my seriousness which makes you hungry." Reaching down to one side, he brought up a tray of bread and cheese and fruit and a flask of spring wine. And he went on laughing quietly while Covenant pounced on the food. Covenant ate steadily for some time before he began looking around. Then he was taken aback to find that the cave was profuse with flowers. Garlands and bouquets lay everywhere, as if overnight each Ramin had raised a garden thick with white columbines and greenery. The white and green eased the austerity of Manholm, covered the stone like a fine robe. "Are you surprised?" asked Foam Follower. "These flowers honor you. Many of the Ramen roamed all night to gather blooms. You have touched the hearts of the Ranahin, and the Ramen are not unamazed or ungrateful. A wonder has come to pass for them, 50 Ranahin offering to one man. The Ramen would not exchange such a sight for Andalane itself, I think. So they have returned what honor is in their power." "Honor?" Covenant echoed. The giant settled himself more comfortably and said, as if he were beginning a long tale, "It is sad that you did not see the land before the desecration. Then the Ramen might have shown you honor that would humble all your days. All matters were higher in that age, but even among the lords there were few beauties to equal the great craft of the Ramen. Marrow meld, they called it. Andaluvian yajna in the tongue of the old lords. Bone sculpting it was, from vulture and time-cleaned skeletons of the plains of Ra. The Ramen formed figures of rare truth and joy. In their hands, under the power of their songs, the bones bent and flowed like clay and were fashioned curiously, so that from the white core of lost life the Ramen made emblems for the living. I have never beheld these figures, but the tale of them is preserved by the giants. In the destitution and diminishment, the long generations of hunger and hiding and homelessness which came to the Ranahin and the Ramen with the desecration, the skill of Marrowmeld was lost." His voice faded as he finished, and after a moment he began to sing softly. Stone and sea are deep in life. A silence of respectful attention surrounded him. The Winholms near him had stopped to listen. A short time later, one of them waved out toward the glade, and Covenant, following the gesture, saw Lithe striding briskly across the flat. She was accompanied by Lord Moram astride a beautiful roan Ranahin. The sight gladdened Covenant. He finished his spring wine in a salute to Moram. "Yes," said Foam Follower, noticing Covenant's gaze. "Much has occurred this morning. High Lord Prothal chose not to offer himself. He said that his old bones would rather suit a lesser mount, meaning, I think, that he feared his old bones would give affront to the Ranahin. But it would be well not to underestimate his strength." Covenant heard a current of intimations running through Foam Follower's words. Distantly, he said, "Prothal is going to resign after this quest, if it succeeds." The giant's eyes grinned. "Is that prophecy?" Covenant shrugged. "You know as well as I do. He spends too much time thinking about how he hasn't mastered Kevin's lore. He thinks he's a failure. And he is going to go on thinking that, even if he gets the Staff of Law back. Prophecy, indeed." "Don't laugh." Covenant wondered how he could explain the resonance of the fact that Prothal had refused a chance at the Ranahin. "Anyway, tell me about Moram." "Happily," Foam Follower said. "Lord Moram, son of Variol, was this day chosen by Heinaril of the Ranahin, who also bore Tamarantha Variol mate. Behold, she is remembered with honor among the great horses. The Ramen say that no Ranahin has ever before borne 2 riders. Truly an age of wonders has come to the plains of Ra." "Wonders," Covenant muttered. He did not like to remember the fear with which all those Ranahin had faced him. He glared into his flask as if it had cheated him by being empty. One of the nearest Winholms started toward him carrying a jug. He recognized Gay. She approached among the flowers, then stopped. When she saw that he was looking at her, she lowered her eyes. "I would refill your flagon," she said, "but I fear to offend. You will consider me a child." Covenant scowled at her. She affected him like a reproach, and he stiffened where he sat. With an effort that made him sound coldly formal, he said, "Forget last night. It wasn't your fault." Awkwardly, she extended the flask toward her. He extended the flask toward her. She came forward and poured out spring wine for him with hands that shook slightly. He said distinctly, "Thank you." She gazed at him widely for a moment. Then a look of relief filled her face, and she smiled. Her smile reminded him of Lena. Deliberately, as if she were a burden he refused to shirk, he motioned for her to sit down. She placed herself cross-legged at the foot of his bed, gleaming at the honor the ring thane did her. Covenant tried to think of something to say to her, but before he found what he wanted, he saw Warhaft Quan striding into Manholm. Quan came toward him squarely, as if he were forging against Covenant's gaze, and when he neared the Unbeliever, he waited only an instant before asking his question. "We were concerned. Life needs food. Are you well?" Well? Covenant felt that he was beginning to glow with his second flask of spring wine. "Can't you see? I can see you. You are as sound as an oak." "You are close to us," said Quan, stolid with disapproval. "What we see is not what you are." This ambiguous statement seemed to invite a mordant retort, but Covenant restrained himself. He shrugged, then said, "I'm eating," as if he did not want to lay claim to too much health. Quan seemed to accept this reply for what it was worth. He nodded, bowed slightly, and left. Watching him go, Winholm Gay breathed. "He dislikes you." Her tone expressed awe at the Warhaft's audacity and foolishness. She seemed to ask how he dared to feel as he did, as if Covenant's performance the previous night had exalted him in her eyes to the rank of a Ranahan. "He has good reason," answered Covenant flatly. Gay looked unsure, as if she were reaching out for dangerous knowledge. She asked quickly, "Because you are a leper?" He could see her seriousness, but he felt that he had already said too much about lepers. Such talk compromised his bargain. "No," he said, "he just thinks I'm obnoxious." At this, she frowned as if she could hear his complex dishonesty. For a long moment, she studied the floor as if she were using the stone to measure his duplicity. Then she got to her feet, filled Covenant's flask to the brim from her jug. As she turned away, she said in a low voice, "You do consider me a child." She walked with a defiant and fearful swing to her hips, as if she believed she was risking her life by treating the ring thane so insolently. He watched her young back and wondered at the pride of people who served horses, and at the inner conditions which made telling the truth so difficult. From Gay, his gaze shifted to the outer edge of Manholm, where Moram and Lythe stood together in the sunlight. They were facing each other, she nut-brown and he blue-robed, and arguing like earth and sky. When he concentrated on them, he could make out what they were saying. "I will," she insisted. "No, hear me," Moram replied. "He does not want it. You will only cause pain for him, and for yourself." Covenant regarded them uneasily out of the cool, dim cave. Moram's rudder nose gave him the aspect of a man who faced facts squarely, and Covenant felt sure that indeed he did not want whatever Moram was arguing against. The dispute ended shortly. Main Thrall Lithe swung away from Moram and strode into the recesses of the village. She approached Covenant and surprised him entirely by dropping to her knees, bowing her forehead to the stone before him. With her palms on the floor beside her head, she said, "I am your servant. You are the Ringthane, master of the Ranahin." Covenant gaped at the back of her head. For an instant he did not understand her. In his surprise he could not conceive of any emotion powerful enough to make a main thrall bow so low. His face felt suddenly full of shame. "I don't want a servant," he grated. But then he saw Moram frowning unhappily behind Lithe. He steadied himself, went on more gently. "The honor of your service is beyond me." "No," she averred without raising her head. "I saw. The Ranahin reared to you." He felt trapped. There seemed to be no way to stop her from humiliating herself without making her aware of the humiliation. He had lived without tact or humor for such a long time, but he had promised to be forbearant. And in the distance he had traveled since Mythal Stonedown, he had tasted the consequences of allowing the people of the land to treat him as if he were some kind of mythic creature. With an effort, he replied gruffly, "Nevertheless, I'm not used to such things. In my own world, I'm just a little man. Your homage makes me uneasy." Softly, Moram sighed his relief, and Lithe raised her head to ask in wonder, "Is it possible? Can such worlds be where you are not among the great?" "Take my word for it." Covenant drank deeply from his flask. Cautiously, as if fearful that he did not mean what he had said, she climbed to her feet. She threw back her head and shook her knotted hair. "Covenant Ringthane, it shall be as you choose, but we do not forget that the Ranahin reared to you. If there is any service we may do, only let it be known. You may command us in all things that do not touch the Ranahin." "There is one thing," he said, staring at the mountain stone of the ceiling. "Give Laura and Python a home." When he glanced at Lithe, he saw that she was grinning. He snapped fiercely. "She's one of the hears of Soaring Woodhelven, and he's just a kid. They've been through enough to earn a little kindness." Gently, Moram interposed. "Foamfollower has already spoken to the main thralls. They have agreed to care for Laura and Python." Lithe nodded. "Such commands are easy. If the Ranahin did not challenge us more, we would spend most of our days in sleep." Still smiling, she left Covenant and cantered out into the sun. Moram also was smiling. "You look better, Urlord. Are you well?" Covenant returned his attention to his spring wine. "Quan asked me the same thing." "How should I know? Half the time these days I can't even remember my name. I'm ready to travel if that's what you're getting at." "Good. We must depart as soon as may be. It is pleasant to rest here in safety, but we must go if we are to preserve such safeties. I will tell Quan and Tuvor to make preparation." But before the Lord could leave, Covenant said, "Tell me something. Exactly why did we come here? You got yourself a Ranahin, but we lost 4 or 5 days. We could have skipped Morinmoss. Do you wish to discuss tactics? We believe we will gain an advantage by going where Drool cannot expect us to go, and by allowing him time to respond to his defeat at Soaring Woodhelven. Our hope is that he will send out an army. If we arrive too swiftly, the army may still be in Mount Thunder." Covenant resisted the plausibility of this. You planned to come here long before we were attacked at Soaring Wood Helven. You planned it all along. I want to know why. Moram met Covenant's demand squarely, but his face tensed as if he did not expect Covenant to like his answer. When we made our plans at Revelstone, I saw that good would come of this. You saw? I am an oracle. I see occasionally. And I saw rightly. Covenant was not ready to push the question further. It must be fun. But there was little sarcasm in his tone. And Moram laughed. His laughter emphasized the kindness of his lips. A moment later he was able to say without bitterness, I would rather see more such good. There is so little in these times. As the Lord walked away to ready the company, Foam Follower said, My friend, there is hope for you. Forsooth, Covenant sneered. Giant, if I were as big and strong as you, there would always be hope for me. Why? Do you believe that hope is a child of strength? Isn't it? Where do you get hope if you don't get it from power? If I'm wrong, by hell. There's a lot of lepers running around the world confused. How is power judged? Foam Follower asked with a seriousness Covenant had not expected. What? I do not like the way in which you speak of lepers. Where is the value of strength if your enemy is stronger? You assume there is some kind of enemy. I think that's a little too easy. I would like nothing better than to blame it on someone else, some enemy who afflicted me. But that's just another kind of suicide. Abdicate the responsibility to keep myself alive. Ah, alive, Foam Follower countered. No, consider further, Covenant. What value has power at all if it is not power over death? If you place hope on anything less, then your hope may mislead you. So? But the power over death is a delusion. There cannot be life without death. Covenant recognized that this was a fact, but he had not expected such an argument from the giant. It made him want to get out of the cave into the sunlight. Foam Follower, he muttered, climbing out of his bed, you've been thinking again. But he felt the intensity of Foam Follower's gaze. All right, so you're right. Tell me, just where the hell do you get hope? Slowly, the giant rose to his feet. He towered over Covenant until his head nearly touched the ceiling. From faith. You've been dealing with humans too long. You're getting hasty. Faith is too short a word. What do you mean? Foam Follower began picking his way among the flowers. I mean the Lord's. Consider, Covenant. Faith is a way of living. They have dedicated themselves wholly to the services of the land. And they have sworn the oath of peace, committed themselves to serve the great goal of their lives in only certain ways, to choose death rather than submit to the destruction of passion which blinded High Lord Kevin and brought the desecration. Come, can you believe that Lord Moram will ever despair? That is the essence of the oath of peace. He will never despair, nor ever do what despair commands, murder, desecrate, destroy. And he will never falter, because his lordship, his service to the land, will sustain him. Service enables service. And that's not the same thing as hope. With the giant, Covenant moved out of Manholm to stand in the sunny flat. The bright light made him duck his head, and as he did so, he noticed again the moss stains which charted his robe. Abruptly, he looked back into the cave. There the greenery was arranged among the columbines to resemble moss lines on white samite. He stifled a groan. As if he were articulating a principle, he said, "All you need to avoid despair is irremediable stupidity or unlimited stubbornness." "No," insisted Foam Follower. "The lords are not stupid. Look at the land." He gestured broadly with his arms as if he expected Covenant to view the whole country from border to border. Covenant's gaze did not go so far, but he looked blinking beyond the green flat toward the plains. He heard the distant whistles of the Blood Guard call to the Ranahin and the nickering answer. He noticed the fond wonder of the Windhomes who came out of the cave because they were too eager to wait in Manholm until the Ranahin appeared. After a moment he said, "In other words, hope comes from the power of what you serve, not from yourself." "Hellfire giant, you forget who I am." "Do I?" "Anyway, what makes you such an expert on hope? I don't see that you've got anything to despair about." "No?" The giant's lips smiled, but his eyes were hard under his buttressed brows, and his forehead's scar shone vividly. "Do you forget that I have learned to hate? Do, but let that pass. How if I tell you that I serve you, I, Saltheart Foam Follower, giant of Sea Reach, and legate of my people?" Covenant heard echoes in the question, like the distant rack of timbers barely perceived through a high silent wind, and he recoiled. "Don't talk like a damned mystic. Say something I can understand." Foam Follower reached down to touch Covenant's chest with one heavy finger, as if he marked a spot on Covenant's mapped robe. "Unbeliever, you hold the fate of the land in your hands. Soul Crusher moves against the lords at the very time when our dreams of home have been renewed. Must I explain that you have the power to save us or orphan us until we share whatever doom awaits the land?" "Hellfire," Covenant snapped. "How many times have I told you that I'm a leper? It's all a mistake. Fowl's playing tricks on us." The giant responded simply and quietly. "Then are you surprised to learn that I have been thinking about hope?" Covenant met Foam Follower's eyes under the scarred overhang of his forehead. The giant watched him as if the hope of the unhomed were a sinking ship, and Covenant ached with the sense of his own helplessness to save that hope. But then Foam Follower said, as if he were coming to Covenant's rescue, "Be not concerned, my friend. This tale is yet too brief for any of us to guess its ending. As you say, I have spent too much time with hastening humans. My people would laugh greatly to see me, a giant who has not patience enough for a long story. And the lords contain much which may yet surprise Soul Crusher. Be of good heart. It may be that you and I have already shared our portion of the terrible purpose of these times." Gruffly, Covenant said, "Giant, you talk too much." Foam Follower's capacity for gentleness surpassed him. Muttering "Hellfire" to himself, he turned away, went in search of his staff and knife. He could hear the noises of preparation from beyond the flat. And in the village the Windhomes were busy packing food in saddlebags. The company was readying itself, and he did not want to be behindhand. He found his staff and knife with the bundle of his clothes laid out on a slab of stone amid the flowers, as if on display. Then he got a flustered, eager Windhome to provide him with water, soap, and a mirror. He felt that he owed himself a shave. But when he had set the mirror so that he could use it, and had doused his face in water, he found Python standing solemnly in front of him, and in the mirror he saw that Laura was behind him. Python stared at him as if the unbeliever were as intangible as a wisp of smoke, and Laura's face seemed tight, as if she were forcing herself to do something she disliked. She pushed her hand unhappily through her hair, then said, "You asked the Ramen to make a home for us here." He shrugged. So did Foam Follower. "Why?" His hearing picked out whole speeches of meaning behind her question. She held his gaze in the mirror, and he saw the memory of a burning tree in her eyes. He asked carefully, "Do you really think you might get a chance to hit back at Foul? Or be able to use it if you got it?" He looked away at Python. "Leave it to Morum and Prothol. You can trust them." "Of course." Her tone said as clearly as words that she was incapable of distrusting the lords. "Then take the job you already have. Here's Python. Think about what's going to happen to him. More of what you've already been through. He needs help." Python yawned as if he were awake past his bedtime and said, "They hate you." He sounded as sober as an executioner. "How?" Laura returned defiantly. "Have you observed him? Have you seen how he sits awake at night? Have you seen how his eyes devour the moon? Have you seen his relish for the taste of blood? He is no child, no more." She spoke as if Python were not there listening to her, and Python listened as if she were reciting some formula of no importance. "He is treachery concealed in a child's form. How can I help him?" Covenant wet his face again and began lathering soap. He could feel Laura's presence bearing on the back of his neck as he rubbed lather into his beard. Finally, he muttered, "Try the Ranahan. He likes them." When she reached over him to take Python's hand and draw the child away, Covenant sighed and set the knife to his beard. His hand was unsteady. He had visions of cutting himself, but the blade moved over his skin as smoothly as if it could remember that Atiaran had refused to injure him. By the time he was done, the company had gathered outside Manholm. He hurried out to join the rioters as if he feared that the quest would leave without him. The last adjustments of saddles and saddlebags were in progress, and shortly Covenant stood beside Dura. The condition of the horses surprised him. They all gleamed with good grooming and looked as well fed and rested as if they had been under the care of the Ramen since the middle of spring. Some of the yeoman mounts which had been most exhausted were now pawing the ground and shaking their manes eagerly. The whole company seemed to have forgotten where they were going. The warriors were laughing together. Old Birinair clucked and scolded over the way the Ramen handled his Lilianril brands. He treated the Ramen like spoiled children and appeared to enjoy himself almost too much to hide it behind his dignity. Morum sat smiling broadly on Heinaril, and High Lord Prothol stood relaxed by his mount as if he had shed years of care. Only the Blood Guard, already mounted and waiting on their Ranahan, remained stern. The company's good spirits disturbed Covenant like a concealed threat. He understood that it arose in part from rest and reassurance, but he felt sure that it also arose from his meeting with the Ranahan. Like the Ramen, the warriors had been impressed. Their desire to see in him a new Beric had been vindicated. The white gold wielder had shown himself to be a man of consequence. The Ranahin were terrified, he snapped to himself. They saw fowls hold on me, and they were terrified, but he did not remonstrate aloud. He had made a promise of forbearance in return for his survival. Despite the tacit dishonesty of allowing his companions to believe what they wished of him, he held himself still. As the riders laughed and joked, Mainthrall Lithe came to stand before them, followed by several other Mainthralls and a large group of Cords. When she had the company's attention, she said, "The lords have asked for the help of the Ramen in their fight against Fangthane the Render. The Ramen serve the Ranahin. We do not leave the plains of Ra. That is life, and it is good. We ask for nothing else until the end, when all the earth is Andalain, and man and Ranahin live together in peace without wolves or hunger. But we must aid the foes of Fangthane as we can. This we will do. I will go with you. My Cords will go with you if they choose. We will care for your horses on the way. And when you leave them to seek Fangthane's hiding in the ground, we will keep them safe. Lords, accept this service as honor among friends and loyalty among allies." At once the Cords, Hearn, Thew, Grace, and Rusta, stepped forward and avowed their willingness to go wherever Mainthrall Lithe would lead them. Prothal bowed to Lithe in the Ramen fashion. "The service you offer is great. We know that your hearts are with the Ranahin. As friends we would refuse this honor if our need as allies were not so great. The doom of these times compels us to refuse no aid or succor. Be welcome among us. Your hunter skill will greatly ease the hazards of our way. We hope to do you honor in return, if we survive our quest." "Kill Fangthane," said Lithe. "That will do us honor enough to the end of our days." She returned Prothal's bow, and all the assembled Ramen joined her. Then the High Lord spoke to his companions. In a moment the quest for the Staff of Law was mounted and ready to ride. Led by Mainthrall Lithe and her Cords, the company cantered away from Manholm as if in the village of the Ramen they had found abundant courage.